December 20th, 1943, the skies over northern Germany were a frozen battlefield. Below, smoke rose from bombed-out villages, and the winter sun struggled to pierce a haze of flak and cloud. Above it all, the 17-year-old pub limped through the bitter cold, each engine coughing and sputtering as if it too feared the coming storm. 11 men sat inside that metal coffin, each nursing wounds, exhaustion, and a growing awareness that this could be their last flight. Among them, young pilot Charlie Brown gripped the yoke, the aircraft trembling under the barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Somewhere in the distance, a German fighter roared into the frigid air, and with it came a decision that would defy the very rules of war. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 closed in, wings slicing through the clouds. Franz Stigler, seasoned Luftwaffe ace, assessed the crippled bomber. His orders were clear: shoot it down. Every instinct, every duty demanded he fire. But as he peered into the battered fuselage, something caught in his chest, a pulse of humanity. The Americans inside were broken, terrified, no match for the machinery meant to kill them. Franz's finger hovered over the trigger, and then he did something no soldier should risk. He pulled back. Instead of guns, he drew his plane alongside the bomber, shadowing it, guiding it, and silently guarding it from death. The choice could cost him his life. In Nazi Germany, sparing an enemy was considered treason, punishable by execution. Every second he remained beside ye old pub, he flirted with death in more ways than one. The bomber's crew, unaware of their guardian angel above, fought to keep the plane steady, engines straining, flak ripping through the wings. For Charlie, the sense of doom was unbearable, and yet, just as fear peaked, he noticed the shadow beside them, unwavering, protective. Who was this man, and why was he risking everything to save them? As they crossed the final stretch toward England, the tension did not ease. Each cloud held the threat of another enemy fighter, each mile a possible death sentence. Fran waved once, a signal of silent farewell, then veered away into the horizon. The Americans dared not shout, lest the moment vanish like a dream. Did that just happen? Charlie thought, his hands trembling on the controls. They had survived the impossible, yet none could explain why. Back on the ground at RAF seething, the frost biting their faces, the crew stumbled from the plane. Charlie filed the report, but his words were met with a curt order: never speak of this. Not to anyone. How could one miracle remain a secret? How could a life-altering act of conscience be buried beneath the bureaucracy of war? In the barracks that night, Charlie replayed every second of the flight. Who was the German pilot who defied orders? And what could drive a man to choose mercy over duty when the entire world demanded cruelty? Meanwhile, across the continent, Fran returned to base, haunted by the Americans' eyes, the sound of engines struggling, and a choice that could never be undone but also could never be spoken aloud. It was a moment that would resonate far beyond that winter sky, shaping destinies in ways neither man could yet imagine. And neither knew that decades later, this single act of mercy would ignite a journey of search, reunion, and enduring friendship, proving that even in the darkness of war, humanity could shine. If you're captivated by stories like this, where courage and mercy triumph over violence, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. It helps others discover incredible historical stories like this one. The war ended, but for Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler, survival did not bring peace. Charlie returned to the United States, a young man hailed as a veteran but haunted by memories too vivid to forget. Nights were the worst: the crackle of flak, the sudden flash of anti-aircraft bursts, the groans of his wounded crew replayed endlessly in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadow of the Messerschmitt beside his battered B-17, a silent protector who had risked everything for strangers. Who was this man? He would never know, or so he thought. Charlie completed his combat tour, eventually leaving active duty only to rejoin the Air Force in peacetime, serving overseas in foreign postings. Promotions came, accolades followed, but the hollow weight of that December day lingered like a ghost. The war had ended, yet one unanswered question loomed larger with each passing year. How could a man trained to destroy instead choose mercy? He buried the memory in journals, letters never sent, and private musings, but the question refused to die. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Germany itself was rebuilding from ashes. Franz Stigler survived the collapse of the Luftwaffe and the fall of the Reich, a man whose moral compass had already been tested in the skies over Europe. Haunted by the faces of the Americans he had spared, he sought refuge in a quiet life far from the remnants of war. Emigrating to Canada, he built a family, a career, a life devoted to ordinary pursuits, but the memory of ye old pub never faded. Every success, every quiet moment with his children and grandchildren carried a shadow. Could a single act of mercy truly matter in the vast machinery of global conflict? For 43 years, two men lived lives that were outwardly normal yet inwardly extraordinary. They were bound by a single encounter, a 10-minute miracle neither spoke of, trapped in silence imposed by the demands of duty and the conventions of a world still recovering from total war. The weight of unsaid words and untold gratitude shaped decisions, marriages, careers, and dreams. Charlie wondered, sometimes in fear, sometimes in wonder, whether the pilot who spared them had survived the war. Franz wondered if ye old pub had made it home, if its crew had lived to tell the story. The passage of time did not diminish the intensity of their shared secret, it magnified it. Letters written in drafts and never sent, photographs never labeled, and stories left incomplete were their companions. Charlie, now an Air Force colonel in peacetime, often reflected on the irony. One moment in the sky, one act of conscience, had defined more of his life than any promotion or medal. And yet, he was powerless to act, bound by orders to silence. How do you honor humanity when the world refuses to remember it? Even as decades passed, the encounter shaped choices. Charlie taught his children to value courage in every form, not just bravery in combat, but moral courage, the strength to do right when wrong would be easier. Franz instilled in his family a similar lesson. Life is measured not only by victories, but by acts of conscience, the quiet defiance of cruelty, the protection of those in need. But the question remained unsolved. Would these two men ever find each other again? And if they did, what would 43 years of silence mean for a friendship born in a single heartbeat of mercy? Life moved forward, yet the memory of December 20th, 1943 remained. The men who had once been enemies were now strangers shaped by the same event, separated by oceans and time, yet inexplicably linked. Their lives were like parallel lines, running close but never touching until a spark of courage and curiosity decades later would force them to converge in a way neither could anticipate. In 1986, over 4 decades after that fateful December flight, Charlie Brown found himself standing among a group of fellow veterans at a gathering of the Eagles in Boston. Stories of heroism and loss floated through the auditorium, each tale carrying the weight of lives interrupted by war. When Charlie spoke, his voice trembled not from age, but from the memory that had never left him. For the first time publicly, he recounted the encounter with the German pilot who had spared ye old pub. Eyes widened around the room. Some listeners whispered in disbelief. A man from the enemy's side, he explained, had chosen mercy over orders. And yet, he admitted, he didn't know who that man was. How could one pilot, a stranger across a continent and decades, remain a mystery after changing the course of so many lives? That moment ignited a mission that would consume him for the next 4 years. Charlie poured himself into the search with a fervor usually reserved for the impossible. Letters were written to the U.S. Air Force, archives combed for combat reports, newsletters for veteran pilots scrutinized line by line. Each lead seemed promising, only to collapse into frustration, names destroyed, records lost, bureaucracies unwilling to help. Time, he realized, was both an ally and a tormentor. He was 67 years old, racing against the slow erosion of memory and mortality. Could he find the man whose active humanity had defined his own life? Meanwhile, across the Atlantic and the Canadian border, Franz Stigler lived quietly, unaware that the young pilot he had spared was seeking him. Decades of silence had made him cautious, and he had almost resigned himself to never knowing the fate of the B-17 crew. He often reflected on that day, especially when teaching his children and grandchildren the value of conscience over duty. Was it enough, he wondered, to do the right thing in a world that rewarded destruction? Had his fleeting act truly mattered, or was it swallowed by history, like so many other quiet gestures of humanity during the war? As Charlie's search intensified, the world seemed to conspire against him. Each returned letter or unanswered query only sharpened the frustration until one snowy morning in January 1990, a breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. A newsletter for combat pilots, a publication Charlie had almost abandoned, contained a small note in the corner: "I was the one. I escorted your B-17 that December." The words were simple, almost casual, yet they carried the weight of a lifetime. Could it really be him? Could the German pilot who had risked everything be alive and willing to meet after 47 years? Charlie's hands shook as he reread the note, each sentence confirming what he had dared to hope for yet feared was impossible. He picked up the phone, dialed across the continent, and heard a voice both foreign and familiar, calm, measured, yet unmistakably carrying decades of unspoken emotion. The search, long and grueling, had ended in a single conversation. Could they bridge decades of history, ideology, and silence in one meeting? Could men who had once been enemies truly understand each other across the chasm of time and memory? Preparations began for their first meeting, each man haunted by anticipation and uncertainty. Charlie thought of the young crew of Ye Olde Pub, many of whom had passed without knowing the full story of their salvation. Franz considered the lives shaped by his decision, including children and grandchildren who owed their existence to that moment. When they would finally see each other, would the years melt away, or would the weight of decades of silence be too heavy to overcome? The day approached, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. What had begun as a fleeting act of mercy high above Germany was about to culminate in a reunion that would defy history, politics, and the passage of time. And as Charlie and Franz prepared to meet for the first time in nearly half a century, they had no idea that their encounter would not only close a chapter of the past, but write an entirely new story of reconciliation, courage, and humanity. If you've been inspired by this incredible story of mercy and courage, make sure to subscribe and like. Sharing stories like this helps more people discover the extraordinary acts that remind us of the best in humanity. The day Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler finally met was crisp and clear, the kind of winter morning that seems to pause the world in quiet anticipation. At Seattle's airport, two men approached each other cautiously, decades of memory and silence compressed into a single heartbeat. Charlie, now in his late 60s, could hardly believe the moment had arrived. Franz, older, composed, yet eyes glistening, extended a hand, and the formal greeting melted instantly into something far more profound. They embraced, two former enemies bound together by an act of conscience that had transcended the chaos of war and the passage of time. Families watched in awe, children and grandchildren realizing that the stories of courage they had heard were not tales, they were living history. Laughter and tears mingled freely as Charlie and Franz recounted the details of that December flight. The flak that shredded the bomber's wings, the engines that coughed like wounded beasts, the silent escort through a sky that had once been a battlefield. Each anecdote was a revelation, a stitch weaving together decades of unspoken emotions, regrets, and wonder. And yet, even as they shared, the question lingered: how could such a simple, fleeting choice have carried so much consequence for so many lives? Over the next several years, Charlie and Franz traveled together, recounting their story to audiences that ranged from classrooms to veterans reunions, from history conferences to documentary filmmakers. They became living proof that mercy, courage, and conscience were not abstract ideals but choices with the power to reshape history. Every handshake, every shared smile was a reminder that even in war, humanity could prevail. And yet, each story they told carried an undercurrent of urgency. The memory of that day was finite, and time was slipping away. Could the lessons of their encounter reach the next generation before the voices were gone? In 2008, Franz passed away, leaving a legacy not just of survival, but of moral courage. Charlie followed months later, their lives intertwined until the very end. Together, they had demonstrated that heroism is measured not only in the destruction of enemies, but in the protection of humanity, even when it defies orders, ideology, or common expectation. Their story was immortalized in the best-selling book A Higher Call, a testament to the enduring impact of conscience in the most unlikely of circumstances. Decades after that cold December day, historians, students, and everyday people have been inspired by the tale of Ye Old Pub and the German pilot who chose mercy. It reminds us that courage is not only about facing bullets, but about facing the moral choices that define who we are. It reminds us that a single act, no matter how brief, can ripple across generations, touching lives in ways unimaginable at the time. And in the skies over Germany in 1943, where flak once tore through the wings of a battered bomber, a moment of mercy echoed far beyond the battlefield. Charlie Brown survived because someone chose humanity. Franz Stigler lived with the knowledge that doing right is often the hardest decision a person can make. Their reunion proved that the bonds forged by conscience can endure longer than hatred, longer than war, and longer than fear. Their story, now told to the world, continues to inspire a simple but profound truth. In the darkest hours, compassion is not weakness, it is the highest form of courage. And sometimes, the smallest gestures, in a single moment of choice, can change the course of history, preserve life, and create friendships that outlast even the most destructive forces humanity can unleash.